Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum, and we're going to continue discussing this idea of a potential capitulation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, I will say, I know whenever I make videos on Ethereum, it leads to a lot of people having a field day with it on Twitter, sort of mocking the view and whatnot. But I cannot be compelled to change my view just because some people don't like it. Okay. And I understand that Ethereum is off of its low over here by about what 80% or so right now. Let's just take a look here. It's about 80% off the low. And of course, a lot of people have celebrated that, and why shouldn't they, right? Like if you bought Ether at $900, then I'm sure you're still fairly content. But I will remind people, right? I mean, this is an asset class where we celebrate 50x rallies, right? Like look at Ethereum's move from the March low, right? This is an asset class where we not so long ago celebrated a 5,200% move in just over a year, about a year and a half, a 5,200% move. And, we have the receipts on the channel back in, 2019, 2020, the accumulation phase of a lifetime video in 2020, calling for this bull market, calling for the massive outperformance of the Ether Bitcoin pair, right? We called for all of that, okay? Now, it's true that I have taken on a very bearish stance on Ethereum for almost 2 years now. Really, the early part of 2022, we came out and said, look, if you want exposure to crypto, it's likely going to be, based on historical patterns, it would make sense to limit most of your exposure to crypto to Bitcoin and to also build up a cash position over the next couple of years. Like there's videos you can go back and look where we said, it's just wealth preservation mode, right? And how you navigate the bear market, right? Tips for navigating the bear market, going into wealth preservation mode, making sure you have cash to take advantage of any, of major dips in the future. But also, if you want exposure to crypto, Bitcoin is likely where you want to be rather than things like Ethereum. And it's nothing personal with ETH. I mean, ETH does really well in certain macro environments. It's just that we're not in the macro environment that typically supports Ethereum price action to the upside, right? We're just not, and we haven't been for a long time. And you might look at this move here and say, well, what about that? Guys, I mean, again, this move here is it's just a 2x rally, right? I mean, these are 2x rallies. This is nothing. I mean, this rally over here was 121% rally, and it still didn't mean anything. This rally here was significant. That was a 350% rally, and we still came back down near the lows. So we have to we have to remember that Ethereum, it can do well in certain types of macro environments, but that this is likely not the macro environment that would support a massive bull run like we saw back in 2020. So with that in mind, I know people don't like these views, and honestly, there's times where I just say, oh, maybe I shouldn't say the same thing over and over and over again, but it's been about a month, I believe, since the last video that we did on Ethereum, where we went through systematically a lot of the different metrics, and so I would like to provide an update on it. And if you don't like it, that's fine, and you'll just take it from there. So right now, Ethereum is coming in at 1581, but as we know, the key to understanding Ethereum is not the USD valuation. And I've said this many times, and I try to do a good job of communicating why the Bitcoin valuation is more important. It's because from a fundamental perspective, Bitcoin is not as risky as Ethereum, right? Now, there are going to be a lot of people that disagree with that statement, and there's nothing necessarily I can say to convince them, but Bitcoin has been around for the longest. It has the highest market cap, right? It stood the test of time far longer than any other cryptocurrency. And it also hasn't made, a lot of major changes recently like Ethereum has, okay? Ethereum, back in September of 2022, went through the merge. But the issue, and I've gotten into a lot of debates with people about this. The issue is that everyone says that the merge completely changes the game, right? And the deflationary, those, a lot of people, I've gotten hundreds, thousands of people, right? But the idea is that the deflationary aspect of it will lead it to doing, performing differently this cycle that it did last cycle. How many times have you heard someone say, "Oh, Ethereum's holding up well, therefore it won't bleed or something against Bitcoin"? But the reality of the situation, right, is that the merge happened here, and ever since then, it's been lower highs and lower lows, right? Ever since then, lower highs and lower lows. And we said that eventually, we said that this is a major distribution phase. In fact, on the day of the merge, we put out a video calling for this double top pattern, right? This 1-2 punch. And the reason we said that was because Bitcoin did the exact same thing in 2021, right? If you remember, in 2021, if we were to go look at and just sort of remind ourselves what Bitcoin did back then, Bitcoin sort of had a double distribution phase, right? So it had this 4 peaks, and then it had sort of this 1-2 punch in the secondary peak, right? And Ethereum looked like it was doing the same thing on its Bitcoin pair. And we followed it quite closely, in fact, right? I mean, we were following it every single day, more or less, and saying that, look, guys, this looks really similar, right? And you have that distribution phase, those 4 peaks, and then you get the secondary distribution phase where you get a 1-2 top, right? A 1-2 punch, and then it just slowly bleeds. And when you look at it, the chart looks like this, right? And I mean, it's just been lower highs and lower lows ever since. So if the argument is going to be that, well, it's deflationary and therefore it's not going to perform the same way as it has historically, why, ever since the merge, has the Ether Bitcoin valuation gone down? Why, right? I think the market has taken that narrative and rejected it. Because if it were true, the Ether Bitcoin valuation would not keep bleeding. Now, would it? Now, one thing that we should discuss is this thing. And I told you guys a long time I thought this was going to break down to the downside, right? We said this, I don't know how many times. And it looks like it is, right? And maybe we should switch. It's already on a regular scale, right? It looks like this is breaking to the downside. But this should not come as a surprise. It should not. We have talked about this likely outcome for a long time. It's the exact same thing that happened last cycle, right? And I distinctly remember people saying the same thing last cycle and saying, oh, well, this is a bullish descending wedge that breaks to the upside, right? Everyone said it. A lot of people were calling for it. And guess what? It broke down. It broke down, okay? And it broke down pretty hard, in fact. I mean, there was not much relief in this drop. From this drop, this started on July, mid-July, it was almost down only with a few green days, but it was almost down only for 2 weeks straight. And then after 2 weeks, we got like a few days of a pump from like August 3rd, maybe to like August 6th or 7th. 4 to 5 days of relief, followed by from August 7th to September 14th. I mean, you're talking about another 4 to 5 weeks, basically, where it was just dropping every single day. So this, I believe, a lot of people were counting on to break out to the upside because they, a lot of people look at these patterns and say, well, statistically, it's more likely to break out to the upside. But in this type of macro environment, as we said, right, it's more likely to break to the downside because liquidity is being sucked out of the system, right? Liquidity is leaving. There's no reason that we should assume the base case is to break to the upside. It seems like the base case was always to break to the downside. And in fact, you can see that that's happened. And, for a long time, the Ether Bitcoin pair was sort of bouncing off these lows, right? I mean, it It would find support here, it finds support here and here, and then it again here. Now it's dropped below. And the reason why that's important is because whenever Bitcoin drops, right, and I think that it will, we've put out a target, and I mean, I think an initial target is 23K. It'll probably go below that actually, but the issue is that before, when Bitcoin dropped, we would often see the Ether Bitcoin pair go up, right? A lot of times, Ether Bitcoin would go up when Bitcoin went down. And the reason is because it could find support, right? There are buyers, right? It would find support on these levels, and people would buy and say, all right, well, you know, we know that they thought they would always find support at that level. And so temporarily it would lead to Ethereum outperforming Bitcoin. The issue now is that support has been broken at 0.058. And we said for a long time 0.058 is a very important level. That was the same level last cycle that Ethereum capitulated from, right? 0.058 is where the real capitulation began. 0.058, now that, you know, if we stay below it and Bitcoin drops, the issue is there's nowhere for Ethereum to hide. You know, the buyers that maybe would have stepped in to buy at these support levels in the hopes that it breaks to the upside, what can they do now, right? What can they do? I mean, it's below this level. And I mean, I think the next level you look at, I suppose, is around that 0.049, 0.05 level. But while there might be a bounce in that range, I think it's much more likely that Ethereum eventually makes its way down to that 0.03 to 0.04 range, meaning it goes below 0.04, okay, below 0.04, which from this level, it would mean Ethereum dropping another 31% against Bitcoin. You know, I'm not talking about USD yet. We'll get to that later, right? But I'm talking about against Bitcoin, another 31%. And if it goes to 0.035, which I think is a likely outcome, it's a 39% drop against Bitcoin. I'm not talking about Ether USD. I'm talking about against Bitcoin. 39% against Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin, that's if you were to go look at the Ethereum valuation on its USD pair, let's assume for a minute, right, that Bitcoin stays constant, which it won't, but let's just assume that it does. A 39% drop gets Ether back down to the range lows, right? It gets it back down to the range lows below $1,000. And that's assuming Bitcoin stays constant, right? Assuming Bitcoin stays constant, which again, it probably won't. So there is a risk of the secondary scare for Ethereum, just like there is for Bitcoin, right? There is a risk. And the issue is that there's no telling how far down it goes. Back last cycle, we had, you know, we were in this downtrend for a while, and then we sort of rallied into a recession, capitulation, and then the Fed printed $6 trillion, and the rest is history, right? What happens if they're not as quick to print this time? They still will likely print at some point, and then Ethereum will start to do well again. But the issue is because inflation is a problem, they might not print as quickly as they did in the last cycle. So that's an important thing that we have to, of course, consider. So, you know, when we talk about Ethereum and what are likely outcomes, you always must consider the Bitcoin valuation. One of the things that we've talked about for a long time with the Ether Bitcoin valuation is that 20-month moving average, And the reason why it's relevant is because, and we actually have a lot of videos. If you go back and look at the videos from early 2020, we were following the 20-month moving average quite closely. And what we noted back then was that we were trying to break out, right? And the reason why I was watching the 20-month in the first place is because I knew back in 2017 we actually held it as support before getting that secondary distribution phase, right? So that was a relevant point to sort of keep in mind. Tuck away in the back of your head. So when we were coming back up to the 20-month moving average, I'm like, all right, well, this is a significant milestone, and we were rooting for it to break above it, and it did, and then it back tested it as support, and then here we got a fake out below it, into a secondary distribution phase, not that dissimilar from Bitcoin USD in 2021. And then we got back below the 20-month moving average and then back tested it as resistance this time, right? Here we back tested it as support. Here we came down and then back tested it as resistance. And now you can see what's been happening ever since. We've just been slowly watching the Ether Bitcoin valuation trend down, right? And that, I think, is likely to continue, right? I think that's like something that's likely to continue for some time, where we're likely going to see the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation trend down. My guess is it continues to trend down through the end of the year. What's fascinating is a lot of people have been bullish on the Ether Bitcoin valuation this year, right? They've been very, very bullish. But when you look at like Heikin-Ashi candles, every candle in 2023 for Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation has in fact been red, right? They've all been red. So, when I look at this, I'm not impressed, right? I'm not impressed with Ethereum's performance this year. It's just gone down for basically the entire year. If you look at yearly candles, this is an interesting way to look at it. And we noted this many, many times over the last year, is that in last cycle, 2019, in the pre-halving year, the Ether Bitcoin valuation closed below the wick of the bear market year. So this year, I'm suggesting, and I've said this again many times, that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation will likely close below the wick of 2022. Now, the wick in 2022 was 0.049. We're currently at 0.057. So I'm saying I think there's a good chance that Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation closes below this wick, meaning it closes below 0.049. Last cycle, it closed 25% below the wick, and it went all the way down at one point to about 31% below the wick. 31% below this wick gets you all the way down to 0.0335, right? A 25% drops gets you to about 0.036, 0.037. So again, I still think there's reason to believe that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation has much further down to go. That doesn't mean there's not going to be occasional rallies, and every time there is, a lot of people come in and they dunk on these views and they say, they sort of mock the Bitcoin dominance theory, and they get really loud at every higher low, and they get really quiet at every higher high by the Bitcoin dominance, right? Because they know their alts are bleeding, right? They know their alts are bleeding. They know Ethereum's bleeding against Bitcoin, but they're not willing to accept it, right? Because they're just not. They're not willing to accept it. And I know, because I've been in that situation before, right? It's hard. It's hard if you've been, DCAing an asset for a couple of years and you're just watching it bleed against Bitcoin. You sort of ask yourself, like, well, why am I buying this? I could have just bought Bitcoin and it would have significantly outperformed. The Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is down 20.56% this year, right? And if something's down 20%, like, that doesn't mean it's holding up well, right? It's not. In 2019, it dropped 49%, right? A 49% drop. 2023, it might not drop a full 49%. A 49% drop from the yearly open would actually put it all the way down at 0.035, approximately. It might not drop that entire way. You could always wick down below it and then close the year slightly up from that low, from that wick. But there is still very much a risk of this pattern continuing. And I say that not to be sensationalist. I don't say it for any specific agenda. I just think it's the most likely outcome. And it's the same thing with the Bitcoin dominance videos. It's like, I don't, if anything, it makes people not like me and talk about the Bitcoin dominance and say that alts are bleeding against Bitcoin. But we have to stick with the data. It's never personal. It's not personal. It never has been. It's just, guys, it's investing. It's a brutal business to be in. And we just need to recognize longer term trends. Am I going to be right about everything? Absolutely not. Have I been wrong about a lot of things over the last few years? Absolutely. Will I be wrong about things in the next few years? Of course. And I will be there for people to dunk on me too when it happens. But these are the most likely outcomes, and I want people to be prepared for it, because I've been in this situation before where I wasn't prepared for it, and I was just thinking to myself, gosh, I really wish I had prepared for that. And had I just taken a few moments to consider the Bitcoin valuation of altcoins in prior cycles, I would have done a lot better in the bull market, because I wouldn't have wasted 2 years of my DCAs into altcoins that just spent the entire 2 years bleeding against Bitcoin. Think about how much you could have preserved capital over the last 2 years had you stuck with if you stuck mainly with cash in 2022 and cash and Bitcoin exposure in 2023. One way to think about it, right, is in bear market years, cash is king. In pre-halving years, cash and Bitcoin are king. It doesn't mean that Bitcoin won't go down, and in fact, I think that it will. And you might say, well, why would you hold Bitcoin in a pre-halving year if you think both bulls and bears get wrecked? One of the reasons it can be worthwhile to have some exposure is so that you don't feel constantly tempted to YOLO into the market every time it pumps 5%, right? If you have some exposure, it at least gives you that exposure to the upside while still minimizing your downside by not having exposure to the altcoin market. And I know there's a few altcoins out there that have done okay, but I'm not going to go speculate on micro caps and whatnot at this phase. I think that the most likely scenario for most altcoins is that they bleed against Bitcoin. It's been the thesis for almost the last 2 years, and it'll likely continue to be my thesis at least through the end of this year. So Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is down 20% this year alone, okay? And if you were to look at year-to-date ROI of the Ether Bitcoin pair and look at 2023 compared to 2019, I think there's a good chance we close this gap, meaning Ether Bitcoin likely needs to drop a lot. Now, there's the narrative, of course, that Ethereum is deflationary and therefore it's different than prior cycles. Well, a counterpoint to that is to say, well, again, lower highs and lower lows since the merge. But we already mentioned that, right? But lower highs and lower lows since the merge. But also, at the current time, it's not actually deflationary. The supply of ETH is going up right now, okay? Which might explain, if you're looking for a narrative, although I've told you guys, narrative follows price. But if you're looking for a narrative to explain what's going on and why maybe this is starting to accelerate, it's because over here, over there, the supply of ETH was going down, right? More or less. Maybe not every single day, right? But more or less, the supply of ETH was going down. Now, the supply of ETH is going up. And it's starting to look like there's a material change in the direction that this is going, and it might be the reason why the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is starting to break the trend to the downside. Now, I will be the first to say, you can take the narrative and put it aside because it didn't really matter in the first place. If you're searching for a narrative, you can always find one. But the most likely outcome for a long time, as we've said, is that Ether Bitcoin breaks this wedge to the downside, right? And it looks like that it is. And if you're not familiar with the supply, right? So this is ultrasound.money. It's a website where you can actually look at the supply of ETH, and this is what it looks like, right? So over the last, let's start on the lowest time frame and sort of work our way forward. This is over the last 5 minutes, right? So over the last 5 minutes, annualized, the supply of ETH is going up 0.744% per year, okay? Which is significant, right? That's a significant amount, but it's only over the last 5 minutes, right? Let's get a little bit more data to make it a little bit more relevant. Let's look over the last hour. Okay, it's going up 0.566% per year. You can see annualized at this rate, we're only burning 208,000 ETH per year. The problem is that there's going to be approximately 890,000 ETH issued, which means the supply growth is 0.57% per year, right? This is not deflationary. Why is it not deflationary? It's because liquidity is drying up and there's just not as much interest in the cryptoverse. The way you see it get burned is when a lot of people are using the blockchain, right? They're doing stuff, right? But as people leave the cryptoverse, as the social risk goes down, there's not as much burning going on, right? There's not as much supply being burned. Therefore, what was previously deflationary because there was enough social interest has now become inflationary again. Why has it? Why has the social risk gone down? Macro conditions do not favor crypto. Furthermore, crypto attracts people because it goes up 50x at times, not because it's going up 100% and then dropping 40% or something, right? That's what attracts people, is when it goes up 50x. This type of move, you don't need crypto for this, right? You can get this in the stock market. When Meta went below $100 on ITC Premium, I said, this is this is likely going to be great value, and this is likely going to be the low below $100, right? Just below $100. And it was. We don't know if it'll be the macro low. I suspect that even if we get a recession, that Meta will put in a higher low, but it went up 3x, right? Meta went up 3x off its low, right? Look at that move. This white line, so this is where I said was a great accumulation phase on Meta, right below this white line when it was below $100. Meta's up 259%. So that kind of explains why, why people lose interest in crypto. You don't need crypto to get a 2x rally, right? You don't. You can get that in tech stocks when they get sold off, right? You don't need crypto for that. So that's one of the reasons why social risk has gone down. And it's one of the reasons why the supply of ETH is going up. And on a daily time frame, you can see that it's averaging out 0.435% per year to the upside. So if you annualize what's going on here for the day, the supply of ETH will go up 0.43% per year, because while 318,000 ETH might be being burned, 841,000 ETH is being issued. Still inflationary. 7 days. Still inflationary. 9,900 ETH supply change over the last 7 days, over the last week. Net 9,900 extra ETH. That's not deflationary, right? That's more ETH. 30 days. Over the last 30 days, almost 30,000 ETH has been added to the supply. 30,000. This number, by the way, is likely going to go up. The reason for that is if you look at on a daily time frame, you can see that the supply change is 1431, right? But if you multiply 1431 by 30, right, you're not getting 29,000, right? You're getting much higher number than that, right? I mean, this is getting to be, if you think about say 1,500 or something, and you multiply 1,500 by, or let me just do the math really quick. So 1431.6 times 30. So 1431.6 times 30 gets you 42,948. 42,948 ETH over a monthly time period. But when you go to the monthly time period, you can see that it's only been, the supply chain is only up 29,973. The reason is because in the last few days, in the last couple of weeks, right, activity is really slowed to almost a halt. So if we were to fast forward this, maybe another 30 days or so, perhaps the supply change over a monthly period, over the last month, will have actually been closer to say 45,000 or something. Now, since the merge, the supply is still down, right? But look at this, right? It went down pretty quickly over here in, March, April, May, June. This was when all the meme stuff was going on and a lot of other stuff as well. And then now it's starting to go back up. You can see that the supply sort of bottomed, at least the net sort of bottomed down here at around negative 303,000 or so. And now it's back up to negative 272,000. So what happens if you add another 45,000, 50,000 ETH to the supply on a monthly basis for the next 6 months, right? Then the supply of ETH is higher than where it was at the merge. So that's the issue here. That's the issue that Ethereum faces, is that the narrative that that people put forth oftentimes when criticizing the views and it's fine to criticize the views, right? It's fine. But the most common thing that I saw, the most common retort, well, you're not considering the tokenomics. It's deflationary. Well, it's not deflationary anymore. So that narrative is no longer sound. It doesn't mean that it won't eventually return to being deflationary. It probably will when we get back to looser monetary conditions. But we're not at that phase right now, and who knows how long it's going to take to get there. My guess is it happens sometime next year, right? And maybe, by the way, maybe by the time this returns back up here, where the supply is back to where it was over here, maybe that offers a good buying opportunity for ETH. I don't know. We'll have to see what's going on at the time. It could be one of those things where you you know, people sell the rumor of it happening and they actually buy it when it occurs. Sort of the reverse of you know, buy the rumor, sell the news. Maybe it's buy or sell the rumor, buy the news. I don't know, right? I'm just sort of speculating dubiously, of course, but that is something that I think it's worthwhile to draw your attention to, that this is sort of reversing the trend here. And that is an issue for Ethereum, because one could argue that one of the reasons it held up so well in 2022 was because people were banking on it becoming deflationary. And perhaps that was why Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation held up so well, like people constantly like to say. But if that narrative gets unwound, then that means Ethereum has to now all of a sudden price in, at least temporarily, not being deflationary. Again, that doesn't mean that it won't return to being deflationary eventually. I think it probably will. But in the short term, that has to get priced back in of, oh, this is not deflationary anymore, therefore it's probably overvalued at these Bitcoin valuations. And that's why I think you're seeing it break to the downside. Look at the bull market support band for the Ether Bitcoin pair. Look at this. I mean, you know, the entire year it's been getting rejected by the bull market support band constantly. And every single time people came out of everywhere to say, sort of dunk on the Bitcoin dominance and all this stuff, it was always lower highs and lower lows. It was always lower highs and lower lows. It was never anything different than that, right? And a lot of people were hoping that it would break to the upside, but it hasn't. And it was the same thing that I saw last cycle. I was just trying to warn people. I'm just trying to show guys, like, this is the most likely outcome. Just try to, if you don't agree with me, that's fine, but it's worthwhile to prepare for it. So I think that this trend is going to continue. One way to look at this trend, by the way, and I think this is a very good way to look at it, is to look at monthly Heikin-Ashi candles, because you can actually see the trend quite clearly. In this case, you have your first initial move in 2016, and then a double top distribution phase in 2017 and 2018. So you have 2016, 2017, 2018. Here, we had 2020, 2021, 2022. I'm arguing that this move is similar to this one, and that this distribution is similar to this one. What you'll notice about this drop here is that it dropped not low. It did not go lower than the initial pullback after the first move. So if you look here, that level on this chart here, around 0.022, right? 0.022. So it could be worthwhile to assume that perhaps Ether Bitcoin will not go below that level in a pullback. If it did, it would be breaking the price, you know, what it did last time, which it can do, right? I mean, it can certainly do, but you can see that it had a pretty big pullback, but it still sort of reversed course, you know, above that level, right? Above that level. So what if, and I've said this many times, what if the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation goes back down to that 0.03 to 0.04 range, which would essentially put it in that range right there, somewhere down here, okay? That's what I think is the most likely outcome, for the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation to drop somewhere between 0.03 to 0.04. I think that's the most likely outcome. So the other thing that people love to point out are the higher lows. And I, you know, again, I've said many times, yeah, I was bullish on Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation right here. Go look at the first video on my channel back in September 2019. We called for it being undervalued. We said it was likely going to go up for the next several years, and it did. So when I make these videos, inevitably someone says, you know, this person is just not considering that it's in a macro uptrend. What am I supposed to do with that? Okay. And the counterpoint to all of that, anyways, by the way, is if you're an investor, you have to look at both sides of it, right? In 2019, I was looking at these higher lows, right? Better believe it. I was, and I was very bullish. What am I looking at right now? I'm still looking at the higher lows and thinking that whatever comes next could be another higher low. But I'm also looking at these lower highs and wondering what's going on there. You know, can we even say that Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation is quote unquote holding up well when it legitimately did not even go to where it went in 2017 and 2018? In 2017, the Ether Bitcoin valuation topped at 0.156. In 2018, it topped at 0.1238. In 2021, it topped at 0.8837, and then in 2022, it topped at 0.08562. So, what do I do with that as an investor? I mean, I see the higher lows. I clearly see them, right? You know, I don't need people to say, well, you're ignoring the higher lows. I'm not. But I also see the lower highs. And for the people that say that Ethereum has always outperformed Bitcoin, if that's the case, why is it putting in lower highs? Sure, if you cherry pick a local low, yeah. But why shouldn't it, right? I mean, it's a little bit riskier than Bitcoin. If you're going to take on the risk of Ethereum in a bull market, you would expect that it would outperform Bitcoin because you're taking on more risk. So you better hope that it outperforms Bitcoin in a bull market. Otherwise, what are you doing? You took on more risk, got less reward. So these are lower highs. These are lower highs. And we also have higher lows. So we take both of those into consideration. And we say, well, you know, I don't know. I wonder, the two most likely scenarios, and we've talked about these many, many times. This should not come as news to anyone. The two most likely scenarios. One of them is sort of the more bullish view. We'll look at the more bullish view first, then we'll look at the more bearish view. The more bullish view is that this is something like a logarithmic regression channel, right? Where, do you know how, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, like look at Ether USD, look at the Ethereum USD valuation, where you sort of fit it to the non-bubble data, right? And we'll get to this chart in a little bit, but where you sort of fit it to that non-bubble data. It's kind of the same thing, but look at the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. So the argument is like the more bullish view is that, you know, whether you think that Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation takes out these highs or whether you think it won't, I still think the people in both camps, in my opinion, should agree, or I mean, at least from my perspective, it seems like the most likely outcome. I guess people are might have their own opinions for other views, but whether you think it takes out these highs or whether you think it comes down to these lows, it would seem like the most likely path in the short to medium term is to come back down here regardless, right? So even if you think it eventually takes out these highs, I would still argue it's likely going to come back down to this range before it has a chance of doing that, okay? So that's the more bullish view, right? The more bullish view is that it comes back down to this level, hangs around this for a while and then breaks back out to the upside. The other view, the more pessimistic view, is what if the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is an oscillator? Okay, now I probably lost some people. How can this be an oscillator? How? It's just putting in higher lows. Well, there's this idea that there's a lot of coins that when they're first sort of created, they go through their initial capitalization phase. But then after that, they sort of normalize into a fairly well-defined range. But I think the bigger thing to look at is not the Ethereum Bitcoin price ratio, because supply is not constant, as we talked about already, right? Supply is not constant. And so what if it makes more sense to talk about Ethereum's market cap divided by Bitcoin's market cap? Is that a more relevant way to look at this? Sorry, I think ETH, let me find the ETH market cap on here. Because I think I'm pretty sure the one that sort of popped up there was not the one I was looking for. So, I mean, this is the Ethereum market cap. So let me see if I divide that by Bitcoin, what it does. Yeah, this is not the right chart. So let me go see. Let me just go make sure I know the ticker of this. I think it's just going to be the same thing. Yeah. So what we have to do is we just have to go over here and we'll just put in crypto cap, if I can spell. And we'll just identify it like that. There you go. There you go. So this is the Ethereum market cap divided by the Bitcoin market cap. And we've talked about this chart as well. When you look at it like this, hey, maybe it's an oscillator. You know? Who knows? What's interesting is when you look at it by market cap, we're already really close to where these monthly candles closed, right? But when you look at it by price, that's clearly, you know, we're not down exactly to those levels just yet. We're getting close, right? But you can see it is a little bit higher up. When you look at it by market cap, it's further down. So that's the more pessimistic view. And you're probably wondering, well, what is my view? To be completely honest, I don't know yet. And I think as investors, it's okay to admit that sometimes. Like, I don't know. For me, what I'll likely do is once it gets back to 0.03 to 0.04, which is what I think is going to happen, I will probably flip to a more neutral stance. And to say, you know, at those levels, I don't know what the most likely outcome is. I don't know. I think the short to medium term, the most likely outcome is 0.03 to 0.04 in terms of the Ether Bitcoin ratio. But beyond that, I really don't know. Okay, so that is my view. And assuming we get to the 0.03 to 0.04 range, I would then probably flip to neutral at that point in terms of my views on the Ether Bitcoin valuation. And I probably would flip to bullish on it, you know, once we go back into, you know, much looser monetary policy, which will of course likely happen at some point. Okay, so that's an important thing to consider as well. So we've covered a lot on the Ethereum Bitcoin pair. Another way, by the way, to look at this is to look at like a moving average, right? And it kind of, and on a weekly time frame, of course. When you look at like a 50-week moving average, it kind of just looks like, you know, it sort of looks like you have a top and then a low, and this is just forming a top again at basically the same level that it formed a top at last time. And now it's starting to go down. And people don't want to believe it. I think one of the reasons why people don't want to believe it is because it spent so much time up here. But it doesn't mean it can't fall. Right? It doesn't mean it can't fall. In fact, I mean, risk assets falling is exactly what the Fed wants to see, more or less. I mean, you know, and the reason is because that will help their fight with inflation. You know, I mean, the truth is, I mean, like, I don't know how to put it, but yeah, let's talk about something else. So let's go over and talk about Ether USD. Okay, I think Ether USD would be something that we can maybe pivot over to at this phase, because Ethereum is coming in now at 1585, 1586. So when you look at Ether USD, one of the things you'll notice is that it just got a nice rally. People on Twitter came out to dunk on me, and it just put in a lower high. And it completely retraced that entire rally, right? And it was just a rejection. And in July, it was a lower high. And in April, that marked probably the yearly high, right? Yearly high in April, lower high in July, lower high in September. But what's fascinating about the market is when you live through it, a lot of people, you know, it takes a long time for people to be convinced, right? It's not like back in April when Ethereum went above 2K that you could have convinced people that that was the yearly high. And there's still going to be a lot of people that you can't convince, right? It's like Bitcoin in 2019. You know, it's not like we knew without a shadow, you know, beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was the yearly high. Look at all of these months. Look at these wicks on all of these monthly candles, right? I mean, we kept coming close to the yearly high over and over and over again, but we still did not take it out. It's like Ethereum this cycle, right? I mean, yeah, like it sometimes goes up, but it's still a lower high. And you can get excited about a lower high if you want to, but it's still a lower high, right? And for Ethereum, it's been putting in lower lows as well. And so this to me looks like a rejection off the bull market support band. It also kind of looks similar to sort of this phase right here. I don't really think it's the exact same thing. I think they will probably play out a little bit differently, but it kind of looks like that phase, right? Where it's, it's in the pre-halving year for Bitcoin, fall below the bull market support band in August, just like it did over here in August, and then just kind of grind it out in this range for a while. And then last cycle, we saw capitulation come in November. I honestly don't think it'll take till the end of November like it did last time, but who knows? Maybe it will. I think it'll probably happen before then, but and by the way, when it happened back then, it was pretty boring. Like the market was really boring because look at these weekly candles. I mean, you rallied on up to get rejected, which is what just happened, right? Like rally up, rejection. Look at Ethereum this time. Rally up, rejection. And then following that move, Ethereum just sort of slowly grinded for a while, probably drawing a lot of people back in, only to then get another big drop in November and then to fade again in December to take out all these prior lows that it had been putting in throughout the entire year. So that's something to consider. And by the way, it's sort of an interaction with the 50-week as well. It was sort of like Ethereum was kind of stuck, around this bull market support band of the 50-week SMA, kind of like it is right now. Right? You can see, right? Kind of like right now. It's kind of right around that range. And over here, back in 2019, it was the bull market support band that pushed it down, right? It just got squeezed in here, and then it just had nowhere left to go because it couldn't break to the upside, so it broke down. So I think when you look at it over here, you're likely going to see something very similar, right? It's probably not going to be able to break to the upside in a sustained way, so it will likely eventually break down. That doesn't mean that it can't go back up to 16 to 1700, right? Doesn't mean that it can't do that, but it just means that the most likely eventual outcome is to take out 1500 and to go even lower. If you look at these higher lows that we've mentioned, this is a log scale, so you can kind of connect the dots, right? And see that this is, that's where it is right now, right? It's trying to hold these levels. And while it might be able to hold it for a bit longer, eventually it's going to likely break to the downside. The issue is that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, as we previously mentioned, is already breaking down. So if Bitcoin were to drop to say 20K or 23K or something, that means that Ethereum likely falls below this support level that it's been holding since June of 2022 during a time where I imagine a deflationary Ethereum was getting priced in. But now, what if the reverse is true? What if an inflationary Ethereum, at least temporarily, has to get repriced in and Bitcoin goes risk off and the Ethereum capitulates? So that is what we, that's what we have to consider. The other thing that I've mentioned as well is that, I do think Ethereum returns home before it goes on any sustained bull run. A lot of people got excited. They can get excited all they want about this rally. It's still just a 2x move. You can celebrate a 2x move if you want, but you can get that in the stock market. A lot of stocks do 2x moves. This was a 50x move, okay? You ride a 50x move up, and then you sort of take a side over here, whether you're bullish or bearish, and everyone celebrates $100 moves in either direction. It's not what you're here for. What you'll notice is that every time Ethereum made a rally to new highs, it did not happen until Ethereum went home first. Home is the lower regression band, right? Go home, new highs. Go home, new highs. Go home, new highs. Still got to see ETH go home, my friends, and it hasn't happened yet. So I think that it will. And again, you can see on these, on sort of these lower time frames, sort of like locally, at least over the last year, a little over a year, you can see that, that it's trying to hold those levels. But again, at some point it likely breaks, and when it does, that's likely when Ethereum starts to head home. When you look at it on a regular scale, you could argue that there's still a little bit of wiggle room here, right? And that maybe it could even fall down into the 1400s and still technically be holding this as support. So I guess it depends on whether you think the linear scale is more relevant, the logarithmic scale is more relevant. It's up to you to decide, right? I'm just not, it's not like there's a right or wrong answer, but that would, this way would at least suggest that it could go a little bit lower and still not necessarily have broken support. The other thing that I want to mention is Ether Dominance, and this is one that we've been tracking, and this one is interesting because it's kind of the same sort of trend potentially as Bitcoin dominance. You might be like, well, what are you talking about? Well, Bitcoin dominance has been putting in, everyone loves to point out the lower highs. I also like to point out the higher lows, just because as an investor, you should consider both sides. Higher lows, lower highs and higher lows. What if Ethereum's doing the same thing? Lower highs, but also higher lows. So if it wants to come back down to this trend line, that means what if it goes down to 9 to 10%? It's currently at 18%. That's a big drop, right? And one of the reasons is because a lot of the altcoins some of the altcoins have been outperforming ETH recently. They have, because Ethereum has been showing a lot more weakness. If you don't believe me, we can quickly look. I mean, look at total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, which does not include ETH, right? It was actually at least trying to hold the 20-week, trying to stay at the 20-week moving average, right? It's fallen below it, right? But it was sort of riding that 20-week SMA down. Now look at total 2. It was barely hanging on, and this includes ETH. So ETH has been showing weakness, and so the Ethereum dominance has been going down. The Ethereum dominance in 2019 bottomed out at around 6 to 7%. What if in, 2023, 2024, it bottoms out at 8 to 9%? That means the Ethereum dominance could drop 50%. That might sound like a lot, but I will remind you guys that the Ethereum dominance back in May of 2022 dropped 30% in like a month, and it went all the way down to 13 to 14%. So, I mean, if it goes down to 13 to 14%, I mean, that's already half the move to get down to these levels down here. And part of the move could, of course, occur while Bitcoin's going up. And it could even occur while Ethereum is going up. But it would probably still mean that Ethereum dominance is going down because Bitcoin is outperforming or Bitcoin is leading the bull market, right? So Ethereum dominance could be following the path of Bitcoin dominance, where it's putting in lower highs, but it's also putting in higher lows. Everyone loves to point it out for Bitcoin dominance. They love to point out the lower highs. But for Ethereum dominance, they go up in arms if you point out the lower highs. Just look at it as best you can in an unbiased way, and hopefully the trends become a little bit more clearer. Because to me, this just simply looks like a pretty bad downtrend here. And we've done many videos on this downtrend for the Ethereum dominance. I mean, it's just so many red weeks. You get one green week, and then everyone, crypto Twitter loses their minds, and then you go the next week and it just completely retraces the entire move, right? And then they get quiet, and then they wait until the next move, the next bounce, and then they dunk on Bitcoin dominance again. It's just such a repetitive process, right? It's like, how long is it going to take for people to just sort of recognize that these are lower highs? And that for things like Bitcoin dominance, it's higher lows, and it has been for the entire year. Bitcoin dominance has been above the 20-week SMA, the bull market support band, for basically the entire year. What in the Cryptoverse has been above the bull market support band all year? Not a lot of things. Bitcoin dominance has been. While Bitcoin dominance is probably the most bullish metric, or one of the most bullish metrics, if not the most bullish metric in the Cryptoverse this year, it has also been the one thing that people have likely faded the most. But it's been going up for the entire year. Do you remember we talked about how Bitcoin year-to-date ROI in 2019 ended the year positive? And then this is what it looks like now in 2023, right? It's still positive, right? But in 2019, it ended the year positive. even though Bitcoin ended the year positive, Ethereum did not. It ended the year about 5% below its yearly open. This is what 2023 looks like for Ethereum. The ROI at this point in 2019 is basically at the same level that it is today. About the same ROI. And you can see how Ethereum ended up finishing the year. It dropped, came back up for a few more weeks, and then had another big drop, and then just sort of slowly bled until the end of the year. And then we rallied up into early 2020, into the recession, and then capitulation down. And that marked the final low before the real bull market happened. So you see this chart and how Ethereum ended the year below the yearly open. The yearly open this time is at 1195. And I've been saying all year, I think there's a good chance Ethereum will close the year below its yearly open. So that means closing below 1195. Okay, and if it closes, let's say 5% below it, 1195, which is what it did in the last cycle in 2019, a 5% move below that puts it at around 1132. So I think the most likely outcome is for Ethereum to drop below $1,200 within the next 2.5 months. And I mean, it could certainly go lower, but I think there's a good chance it will. I think there's a good chance the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation will continue to drop. The Bitcoin dominance will go up. Ether USD will bleed. Again, Ether USD to me is kind of irrelevant. Like, I mean, if Bitcoin pops up for a couple of weeks and goes back up to like 28K or 29K, then yeah, like it could drag Ethereum back above $1,600. But who cares, right? I mean, if the last thing that the Ether Bitcoin valuation needs right now is a Bitcoin rally. Because if Bitcoin rallies, Ether Bitcoin likely drops as well, right? Just like it drops when Bitcoin goes down. So the idea is that Ether Bitcoin goes down, whether Bitcoin goes up or down. That's the sort of where the altcoin reckoning comes from, is that it just doesn't really matter what direction Bitcoin goes. The altcoin market gets wrecked either way. So I think we'll wrap it up. And we've been talking a lot here about Ethereum. And, I guess that at some point we're going to wake up and the support level for Ether USD will have broken. Okay. Again, you can look at it. This is on a log scale, so we can sort of connect the dots. Who knows when that's going to be? Could be this week, could be next week, could be next month, could be 2 months from now. I don't know. But I suspect that it will break. And when it does, I don't know how low it goes, because you're pricing in at least a temporary inflationary ETH. You could be pricing in a recession. It's also corresponding to the potential collapse of the Ether Bitcoin pair below the level that it's been holding as support. So now that it doesn't have that support, who knows where the low is? Who knows? I don't know. I think people need to be prepared for Ether Bitcoin to go to the 0.03 to 0.04 range, and for Ethereum to drop below its yearly open. So we'll wrap it up there. That's my view on the market. That's my view on Ethereum. I can promise you I'm not a perma bear on ETH, even though it might seem like that. I would just say, to the people who've disregarded these discussions about Ether Bitcoin just simply because it's deflationary, maybe now it's time to pay attention to the other narrative, considering that the deflationary trend is no longer a thing, and it's gone back to inflationary. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.